Hello everyone, I'm Burfy1322 and welcome to the Stewards room, where we'll be taking a look at racing incidents submitted by you guys and trying to make a determination on who, if anyone, was at fault. There's a link in the description to submit your own clips, and feel free to check out the playlist link for more of these videos, specifically the first, which acts as a scene setter. Also, keep an eye out for cards popping up on screen towards the end of each segment where you can vote on who you thought was at fault for each incident. So all the clips that we had last week were talking about overtaking by going up the inside of someone. The clips from this week are all about overtaking by going around the outside of someone, and there are very nuanced differences between with regards to the rules when you're trying to overtake somebody up the inside to when you're trying to overtake them around the outside, and we're going to cover that in this video. So from our perspective, so far nothing seems to be, it's a very inconsequential clip, this one. We're at Suzuka, we're coming up to the Degners, we take the line into the first corner, nothing really seems to be at fault from our perspective. So let's slow it down, and we'll see that obviously as we're coming around here, the car that we're looking at specifically starts to take a bit more of a defensive line. So he could be further over this way, but if he did that, he knows that there's someone right here who wants to get past him, and he's got a bit of an overspeed with a slipstream or whatever, and if he was over this area of the track, the person who was here would just be in this position, and he would then basically have the inside line for the next corner. So he wants to avoid that. He wants to make the car have to go around the outside as he's doing here. Now if the positions were switched, if this car was instead over there and that car was instead over here, this would be job done at this point. He was up the inside. This car is way up the inside. He's further ahead at this point. It would be job done, slam dunk into the corner, and he would get away and get the overtake done. But because he's on the outside, that creates a big difference. Now, as you can see, at this point, coming up to the apex of the corner, they're about level. You can just see the front end of the car that's trying to overtake around the outside, and they're about level in respect to the apex of the corner, the racing line. And when you're trying to overtake around the outside, you have to be further ahead than that, basically. So let's have a look at obviously the rules of racing that we always look at, that's linked in the description in every episode that I introduced in episode 1. Let's have a look at what it says about trying to overtake around the outside. Obviously, as you can see, what happens there, because he's on the outside, he ends up getting ran wide, spins out, and doesn't get the overtake done. So the rules of racing again, here we are again, and we want to be looking at specifically the part about overtaking around the outside. Now, it's again in the same section of who owns the racing line. I said in episode 1 that most things will be about who has the right to the racing line at any given moment. We covered attacking up the inside in the previous episode, but what does it say about going around the outside? So a defender who's overtaken on the inside will sometimes try to hold their position using the outside line. Alternatively, an attacker may try to overtake around the outside against a defender who covers the inside line. And there's very slight differences. Now, the guiding principle here is that the driver on the outside should be at least level, front axle in line with front axle, with the driver on the inside to have a claim to the racing line on the corner exit. So obviously it depends on the type of corner and the cars and things like that. And it might mean that, the outside line can be somewhat quicker sometimes, or it's a case-by-case basis, but in general, the racing line is, as we covered in episode 1, outside, inside, outside again. That's generally the racing line. So when you're trying to go around the outside, you have to be, as you can see on the diagram, more than halfway. Basically, you have to be more than level, at the apex of the corner, on the exit of the corner. You can see that it's essentially, front axle to front axle here. You essentially have to be more alongside. You have to be essentially in front at the apex of the corner to be able to have the speed to be level on the outside of the corner. So this is the point where it matters, right here. This is where the incidents can happen, because the car on the outside, if he's not far enough alongside, then the car on the inside is well within his rights to simply take his racing line. And we'll see that as we just scroll further down. Maybe I can leave that in place. You can see that here. So the car on the inside is just ahead of the car. Even on the entry to the corner, the blue car here is slight. Why is that so big? Okay, let's go back. The blue car here is slightly ahead of the red car, but then because he's not carrying enough speed around the outside, at this point on the apex of the corner, they're about level. By the time you get to halfway towards the exit of the corner, the blue car has fallen behind. So at this point, the red car is well within his rights to continue his racing line because he's ahead, and that's what matters. It matters about who's ahead at any given moment on the corner exit phase when you're trying to overtake around the outside. Now, again, when we talked about coming up the inside, you only had to be halfway alongside the person who you were trying to overtake to then have the rights to the apex. But then once you had taken that apex, if you remember, you were well within your rights to continue your racing line and basically run the car the defending car out of road. And the same is true here. So when you're overtaking around the outside, you have to be very careful, because the person who you're trying to overtake is well within their rights to run you out of road if you're not level with their car. As we can see here, you have to be level. You have to be absolutely dead level. Anything less when you're trying to overtake around the outside, and you will be run out of road, and you will be allowed to be run out of road. That's hard, fair racing. Now, again, I'm just looking at the rules. You may disagree with what the rules say, but that is the rules as they're set forth in, general motorsport. But you can see that as we come closer to the corner, again, it's actually very similar to the first phase of one of the diagrams that we saw just recently. He is very slightly ahead. He's attacking, he's trying to go out around the outside. He's very slightly ahead at this point, but he's nowhere near being ahead when it comes to getting to the apex of the corner. And, at this point, he's only going to lose ground. He needed to be much, much further ahead on the outside to even consider trying to stick around that outside and expect it to work. Because at this point, he's out of our screen at this point. That we are, as the driver who we're focusing on, we are completely within our rights to now, at this point, take our racing line. We can't see the car next to us. He's nowhere. He's behind. You can even see the arrow. He's behind right there. So we are well within our rights to now that we know that the car who's trying to overtake us is behind us, even if he's alongside us a little bit, it doesn't matter. We're still well within our rights to continue our racing line. That's what he does. Takes the racing line to the outside of the corner. And as you can see, you might be able to see it, I don't know, just in the wing mirror here, you can see the back wheel of the car behind. He's on the dirt. He's off the track. And essentially that's his own fault for trying to make an overtake, trying to make a move around the outside when really he wasn't anywhere near level or close enough to be able to do it. And he ran wide, and that's the risk that you take when you try to do moves around the outside. That is just the risk that you take. And that's why outside overtaking doesn't happen as often, because it's much, much more difficult to do and much more difficult to carry more speed around a corner when you're not on the racing line. The racing line is the quickest way around a corner, so you have to carry even more speed to be able to do a slower way around the corner quicker. So didn't work out, and I would say that was just a racing incident. That if you're going to put blame on somebody, you have to put blame on the guy who came off worse. But because he came off worse, it was just a racing incident, you could say. But let me know who you think, down below in the comments. What do you think about this one? and obviously in the pole in the top right as well. But let's move on to our next clip. We're on GTA, very similar story, trying to go around the outside of someone. Now he's got a good, overspeed, but again, he's pretty much level. Now the difference here with this one that I can see is that it's a much longer corner, and the guy who's you've got to be smart about it. When you're trying to go around the outside of someone, you can't just expect someone to disappear. So from what I'm seeing here, it kind of looks like that's what he wanted to happen. They're both level, they're both fighting for the corner, and it's essentially a little bit of understeer from the Carbonizer here. What can you do? It's just what happens. But when you look at the angle that the Banshee is, he's basically, really all this space out here that he could be using, and the small amount of space here. I mean, I guess you could say that there's this extra space as well, but it feels like he's trying to squeeze the car on the inside. And when you're trying to overtake around the outside of a corner, you can't squeeze anybody on the inside. That's just not something that's going to happen, because this is exactly what will happen. He has some momentum. The car on the inside has some momentum that he can't just get rid of. He can't just disappear. Now, you don't know necessarily whether he could have been able to make that turn a bit better. He could have been able to continue. From my perspective, this feels more like a racing incident, because you could say you could argue it either way, and it's very difficult to know. From each perspective. You can see the flames coming out of the back of the Carbonizer here, which basically means that he let off the gas to try and avoid this from happening, and trying to make the corner. At this point, he's trying to make a corner when the corner has become more of a corner, essentially, for the Carbonizer. He can no longer use all of this road. He can only use this little tiny bit, and it doesn't help that the Banshee is making the bit of road that the Carbonizer can use much smaller. And we're not even at the corner exit phase at this point. The corner exit it's not until we get over here. So he is ahead, but you've got to play it smart, and you can't just expect someone to disappear on the inside. They have it coming together. I would say, it's a racing incident. When you look at the Carbonizer, he's kind of taking the racing line as it would be normally. Maybe it's a limitation of his car that he just can't turn any more than that. And really, if the Banshee had just given a little bit more space on the inside, this hit probably would have happened with them being side by side instead, because the Banshee would have lost a little bit of speed in comparison by going a little bit wider. It would have hit side by side, and then they probably would have continued, and then the Banshee would have had the inside for the next corner. He pinched him, essentially, from what it looks like, and you can't really do that when you're trying to overtake around the outside. You can't just expect someone to disappear. You've got to give at least a little bit of space as someone who's trying to go around the outside. I would put this down as a racing incident, personally. You may see it differently. Like I said, vote on the poll in the top right, or leave your comments down below what you think about this one. It was a good move initially. He got into a good position to make an overtake around the outside, but I think he didn't give enough space, and you can't just expect someone to disappear in a racing situation. So let me know your thoughts, obviously. So the final one, Project Cars 2, and this is again going around trying to make an overtake around the outside, and we've got so many views of this, so it's not even much point of me actually scrolling through it and doing different speeds or anything like that. it kind of just plays itself. So we'll talk about it just as the video plays. And again, it's another classic going around the outside type deal. Who was at fault for this when you're trying a move around the outside? It's obviously in the wet. It's very close. You can see here, it's very, very close. And he tries it, why not? Why not try around the outside in wet conditions? You might get a decent amount of grip around the outside as well. Certainly, a better chance of that happening in the wet than the dry. And he gets, in a decent position. In fact, if anything, he really does get himself into a really, really good position, because what he does is he turns it into an inside overtake. I am going to start looking, going back, but he turns it into an inside overtake. So he goes around the outside of the first part of the corner. So there's this kind of, essentially two parts two corners following each other. They're sequential corners. And he goes around the outside of the first part, which gets him into a position to be up the inside for the second part. But then that comes into the whole idea of then it's an inside overtake. So we've kind of tried it around the outside. We didn't fully get it done around the outside. So then it transfers itself into an inside overtake for the next corner. And as you can see here, when you look at the position here, if you can remember what the rules from last week when we were talking about inside overtakes, this is, from my eyes, a slam dunk racing incident, because he is basically as halfway alongside the car in front as it's possible to be. And, in that incident, as we talked about previously, and we'll go back to the document to check it, when you're halfway along the person who you're trying to overtake up the inside, both cars really share the blame. The guy who was doing the overtaking should have, maybe backed out of it. The guy who was on the outside being overtaken should have noticed he was there and given a bit more space. And you can't really put fault to any one person. And because you really could put fault to both people, then it becomes a racing incident. And that's just how it is. So we're back in the document, and I think this is a good one to show the differences between overtaking around the outside and the inside. When the attacker is more than halfway along the inside of someone, when you're attacking up the inside, then any collision is the fault of the defender. Now that's very different, obviously, to going around the outside, where you need to be fully alongside someone if you're attacking around the outside to be deserving of any space on the exit of the corner. But when you're attacking up the inside, you only need to be more than halfway alongside the person who you're trying to overtake to be deserving of the apex and get the position. So when you're more than halfway alongside, it's the fault of the defender if a collision happens. When you're less than halfway alongside, it's the fault of the attacker when a collision happens. But when you're approximately halfway alongside, as you can see here, it becomes a racing incident. You can put blame on both the attacker and the defender, and both of them could have done better to avoid a collision. One person wasn't more at fault than somebody else, so it's a racing incident when you're approximately halfway alongside. And I think the example that we're seeing here is exactly that. So we can actually see it here as a final sort of confirmation of that, if you like, from the outside shot from the wide car. Very good replay system on this, I've got to say. Really, this is handy. The more detail that you can give in your clips, the more perspectives and all that kind of stuff, the better it'll be. But comes around the outside, gets the job done around the outside to essentially give him a better position for the inside. And when they come together, it's essentially front wheel to the midpoint of the car. I think it's pretty clear to see that. We'll pause it here as well. But at the point of contact, the front wheel is hitting the side pod of the car, and that is as halfway alongside the car as you could possibly be. So neither person really at fault for a collision happening here, or you could change it around and say both people were at fault for a collision happening there. Either way, it's a racing incident. It's one of those things you can't really put blame on one person or another. You obviously might think differently. We've got the poll in the top right that you can vote on, and obviously let me know in the comments for all of these clips. As always, let me know what you think. But from my eyes, and based on looking at the rules, this seems like it is a racing incident, and based on what the notes said for this clip, it seems like the two drivers who were involved in this also thought it was a racing incident as well, and they basically decided that. I wanted to see what obviously I thought and maybe what you all thought as well. But yeah, that's an interesting one. This whole outside overtake to an inside overtake. Obviously in the wet it doesn't help visibility and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, for me, just one of those racing incidents. So that's pretty much it for this episode. Let me know all your thoughts down below and in the polls on the video itself. You can find in the video description all the info and links that you may need to submit your own clips. And if you'd like to support me, you can do so on Patreon by becoming a YouTube member or simply subscribing and liking the video. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.